Hello, I'm Gwen Eichel, and welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra. Joining me around the table, Molly Ball of The Atlantic, Robert Costa of The Washington Post, Yochi Dreazen of Foreign Policy Magazine, and Elise Labott of CNN, our newbie. When the president walked into the White House briefing room Friday afternoon, his intent was to trumpet the good new economic numbers and to taunt the Republicans in Congress. But under questioning, he also weighed in with some of his thinking on what it takes to be president at a difficult time. This is what he had to say about a new report that declares the U.S. practiced torture.
Even before I came into office, I was very clear that in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we did some things that were wrong. We did a whole lot of things that were right, but we tortured some folks. We did some things that were contrary to our values. And my hope is that this report reminds us once again that the character of our country has to be measured in part not by what we do when things are easy, but what we do when things are hard.
It's easy to forget that this was the subject of some debate at one point. Did the president move the ball on this, Yochi?
I don't think so. And flash back a little bit to when he took office, there was talk about arresting and indicting some of the CIA officers involved in the torture program, and that never happened. And there are Democrats who are still furious about it, who 7 years later still feel betrayed that nothing happened to the actual CIA operatives who actually did the torture. So there was the weird dichotomy and the weird sort of disconnect of him saying we tortured folks, the kind of casual language on a very serious subject. But in the end, not much will have happened to the people who actually did it. And that's a weird legacy of this as well.
Well, and the one thing, he in the full context, he was saying there was torture, but he was also saying he understood how, under the pressure of the time, it happened.
That's right, and he's saying it shows why he didn't pursue criminal charges. Because, well, it shows why, because he's saying you can't be sanctimonious about these type of things. There was this fear after 9/11. Which this is why he understood why they did it. And, you can't, in high quarterback this about passing judgment and the relative safety that we enjoy today. So, I mean, I think it's one thing when he first took office or when he was on the campaign trail, but the realities of governing show that, in second, you can't just
and you don't
talk in a vacuum.
The former president, which is another part of it. The president also reflected on the U.S. role in the world.
Part of the reason why America remains indispensable, part of the essential ingredient in American leadership, is that we're willing to plunge in and try, where other countries don't bother trying. I tell you what, there isn't any other country that's going in there and making those efforts. And more often than not, as a consequence of our involvement, we get better outcomes. Not perfect outcomes, not immediate outcomes, but we get better outcomes.
Not perfect, not immediate outcomes, but it also seemed very interesting to me that came with the president also defending Secretary of State Kerry's efforts. America can't afford to sit on the sidelines, doesn't have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines. Sounds like diplomats talking in the back rooms, what they say to one another.
Well, that's right, and I think that the president, and you've seen over the last couple of months, in fact, when he was speaking in his West Point speech about how the U.S. can't be involved everywhere in the world, and this kind of recognition that we were talking about the U.S. can't be everywhere, and the American people don't want us to be everywhere, and we need to be more judicious about where we place our involvement. But as he was talking about Secretary Kerry's involvement in the Middle East, I mean, whether the U.S. is going to be able to help the Israelis and Palestinians get out of this right now, I mean, this is one conflict where, even though it's not threatening the United States directly, like in Iraq or, ISIS or something like that, but that this is a conflict that for U.S. interests, it's worth it to stay in.
The president was actually saying that in response to a question from Bill Plann at CBS, which was basically, does America matter anymore? And he was trying to make the case that America does.
It reminded me a little bit of the Bill Clinton answer when he was asked, are you still relevant as president? And he had to say, yes, I am still relevant. So the fact the question's even being asked is itself, I think, very revealing. I was struck by a couple of things. You remember, the president obviously is a huge sports fan. He talked about how you hit singles, sometimes you hit doubles, occasionally you hit the big home run, talking about big victories. He has the American public with him to a degree. There isn't a great demand for being involved. There isn't a great demand to go to war. The public on that point agrees. But then when you ask them, should we do more here? Should we do more there? You have this one hand kind of not isolationist, but stay out of it. But on the other, we look weak and we don't like that.
Yeah, they agree, but they still think he's weak and disapprove of what he's doing. It's amazing dichotomy. Finally, the president weighed in on what he really thinks of Congress.
There's no doubt that I can always do better on everything, including, making additional calls to Speaker Boehner and, having more conversations with some of the House Republican leadership. But in the end, the challenge I have right now is that they are not able to act even on what they say their priorities are. And they're not able to work and compromise even with Senate Republicans.
Now let's do a little truth squatting here, Robert. Do congressional Republicans really want to engage with this president? And do the Republicans, and does the president really want to engage with them? This idea of I could call Boehner more, really?
It always seems like the president has been able to get along with Speaker Boehner, but House Republicans clearly, from their public comments and their private asides, are not eager at all ahead of the midterm elections to cut any kind of bipartisan compromise with the White House. And I think the president, he likes, for political reasons, to see this ongoing division within the House GOP. It serves each other's purposes, but perhaps all poll numbers will sink because the country just gets frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the White House legitimately would like to get something done, particularly in terms of getting additional resources to the border. This is not a crisis that benefits them. It makes them look terrible. And I think that's, as Bob sort of alluded to, that's sort of more generally true, that even when people agree with the president's analysis, and one of this president's strengths is that he is a very good understander of things, an explainer of things, an analyst of things, but people are still, as in foreign policy, discomfited by the feeling that he is not the master of the situation, and they blame him for it too. And so you see this anti-Washington mood, this pox on both their houses mood, and this tanking of ratings for both parties, and certainly for the president, along with the Republicans, even when people know on some level that this particular mischief is the Republicans' fault.
Well, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It just means that they're all stuck between their rocks and their hard places again. Thank you, everybody. Stay online to keep up with everything else our panelists are reporting on, as well as my blog about why bipartisanship, which I can't say, but why it's not quite dead. And we'll see you next week on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.